Let's see. I get a lot of requests like this one on the comment section. Tony writes in, I agree with other commentators. As a matter of intellectual honesty, Kant should make a response to R and Ra's rebuttals. If you're for or against Kant, you should support this. Melissa writes in, I'm for Kant, and it really is pointless to respond to Aaron. He spends all his time talking about Kant and theories with no truth. Paul writes in, unfortunately, Aaron talks about a mile a minute and spews nonsense at that exact same rate. It would take literally years to respond. It's simply not worth it. That's been my approach generally, but I thought tonight I'll show you why. Okay? He did, I don't know how many responses he did. The numbering system's all screwed up. I don't have it all straight.
Remember that a while back, the convicted fraud and charlatan, Hovind, posted 2 replies to our debate that were labeled round 3, even though he hadn't yet done a round 2. And once I posted the 7th and final part of my round 2, I gave him 1 month to concede several specific errors he needed to correct that were directly relevant to our debate. On January 7th, he finally did begin a reply to round 2, but it starts with part 2. I guess he forgot that he should have a part 1 first. He quickly followed that with a part 3 and said there that he didn't have any more scheduled for a while, but that he might do some later if he gets time. So the debate is never technically over, since he said it might take several years, but it doesn't continue either, so that he never gets to any of the parts that he knows he can't possibly address.
I don't know which ones I haven't responded to or not, but this is his closing commentary. Now, like I told you, Aaron,
I'll be back.
So, tonight we're going to play just a short amount of our new game, Whack an Atheist, okay? I do apologize. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get back to this. I've had other fish to fry, and frankly, this is low priority. Since on the very first video, Mr. Nelson, who calls himself Aaron Ra, the sun god, okay, Mr. Nelson.
He started this by misspelling my first name and calling me by my old surname,
Mr. Nelson,
just to show his childish disrespect. So I followed suit by referring to him by his old prison name, inmate number 0645-2017.
He spent 20 minutes on ad hominem attacks before getting to his 2-minute, 20-second, which is the purpose of the debate. I said, would you please give me the best 3 evidences you know of for evolution? After 20 minutes of rambling and flapping his jaws, he finally gave 2 minutes and 20 seconds of the best 3 evidences. I demolished in my 7-video response many, many months ago. It took me nearly 5 hours to go through his 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and I think I answered it very thoroughly. However, in his closing comments, he said, remember that a while back, the convicted fraud and charlatan, blah, 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 he goes on with his ad hominem attacks for a while. It says, so he never gets to the parts he knows he can't address. Oh, really, Mr. Nelson?
His last 2 posts were no more than an attempt to obfuscate and distract, to delay any address of the actual science I challenged him on, and to bury this debate in irrelevant tedium so that his dim-witted minions will never figure out how badly he lost.
He would have to concede that evolution is not a religion. This is his point number 1. This is probably all the farther we're going to get tonight, and maybe it's going to be a while, but if you need me to, I'll be back. I can handle all of them. Okay, Mr. Nelson, you just don't get it, okay? I know why, too, you don't get it. So this response is aimed at those who really want the truth and are not committed to their silly religion of evolutionism, and evolution is a religion in every sense of the word.
As I've already explained earlier in this very debate, evolution is not a religion for the reasons explained by my most recent video and the first part of this series. So 0645-2017 has no defense in repeating this lie.
Religion, a belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. In the case of the evolutionist, this controlling power is the evolution itself. That's a controlling power, a motivation to get stronger, better, changes, mutations. Yeah, that's a controlling power.
You have just proven that you don't know what evolution really teaches, or even what it is. Being in your career for this long, you have no excuse for not knowing the subject any better than that. You're demonstrating your learning disability again, because I've already corrected you on exactly this point when we spoke before. In no sense of the word is that a religion, because it is not faith-based, it's evidence-based. And it has nothing to do with any purpose for anything, much less anything to do with the beginning of the universe or what came prior to it. Nor does it require a belief. I would suggest that we both start from not believing anything and just review the possibilities.
Kant calls anyone who accepts mainstream science an evolutionist because he wants to establish the fallacy of false equivalence by pretending that science is a religion too. I don't know how improving our understanding of reality is somehow more dangerous than believing in evil spirits, spells, and curses, but that's what he thinks. At least he realizes how bad religions are.
It's a particular system of faith, and you have enormous faith.
He knows I don't have faith. He's using a fallacy of projection known as tu quo qui, also known as the U2 fallacy, because it's an attempt to project one's own faults onto opponents who will not share them. He knows there's nothing admirable about faith either, being an assertion of unreasonable conviction assumed without reason and defended against all reason. He knows that science is not faith because it is based on evidence. The science is the opposite of faith, the antithesis of faith, requiring all postulations to be objectively evident, verifiable, and potentially falsifiable. He knows from our earlier meeting that I reject faith as the most dishonest position it is possible to have. Any belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason. Importantly, he knows that nothing he just said here is true.
The word evolution has 6 different meanings. 5 of them are religious, and we're going to cover that again, even though you guys can't stand it when I do this. Too bad. Told you. I'll be back. Okay.
When he brings up his 6 levels of cosmic, organic, and chemical evolution that he made up, for example, I could nip that in the bud and keep this talk focused on what evolution really is and not the straw man parody that Hovind wants to make it out to be.
Yeah, and there is, of course, no truth to any of your claims about evolution being a religion, for example. This is just an attempt at projection where you're trying to cast your own faults onto those who will not share them. And it's an attempt at the fallacy of false equivalence, which is what I think you meant to talk about, I'm sure, because that deals with most of your arguments, that and equivocation.
Well, okay. Well, before we get into a discussion too far on the topic of evolution, we need to define what we're talking about. And for many years, I think you've obviously seen many times my division of that word into 6 different categories.
Yes, those are inaccurate, so we're going to go with the correct definition. I know that you've actually bragged many times that people have corrected your misdescription of that, and it's appropriate that they correct you on this. I don't know why you don't correct yourself when you keep repeating an error. So when we talk about evolution, unless otherwise specified, because there is a colloquial meaning that doesn't apply to biological evolution or the science of evolution or certainly the theory of evolution, which pertains only to the aspect or theory of biodiversity, which can be summarily defined as genetic variance in reproductive populations over time, or a change in allele frequencies in reproductive populations over time.
Okay,
now, I can give a longer definition, but still it's going to be within the confines of biology.
Okay, so you're saying the word evolution only encompasses the living things that have already come alive somehow. So you're leaving out any kind of organic evolution, or what I would call.
There's no such thing as organic evolution. If we're talking about abiogenesis, that's a overlapping series of different processes. None of them are the evolutionary process, which is descent with inherent genetic modification.
Once again, I'm using the real definition of evolution. The scientific theory of biodiversity via population mechanics, summarily defined as descent with inherent genetic modification. Paraphrased for clarity, it is the process of varying allele frequencies among reproductive populations leading to usually subtle changes in their morphological or physiological composition of descendant subsets. When compiled over successive generations, these can expand biodiversity when continuing variation between genetically isolated groups eventually lead to one or more descendant branches increasingly distinct from their ancestors or cousins. And this is what you would call microevolution. But of course, the same definition applies to macroevolution too, and I've already shown that speciation is part of macroevolution, and micro and macro are the same theory, whether you're ready to admit that truth or not.
Cosmic evolution. The origin of time, space, and matter, the Big Bang. That is a religious view. There's nothing scientific about it.
But what we know is that the evidence, not faith, indicates that the universe is expanding. Of course, that means that it was once much more compact in the past, mathematically to a single position nearly 14 billion years ago. But even if you don't accept the singularity, how do you account for the current expansion or its obvious implication? And why am I asking you? If I don't know it, you certainly don't. You believe on faith. I follow evidence.
Cosmic evolution is what they call it, okay? You can Google cosmic evolution. There is lots on the internet about cosmic evolution, from Big Bang to humankind. They just don't get it. Mr. Nelson, you don't get it. You don't want to get it because you know where this leads. I do too. Okay.
The Big Bang Theory, nucleosynthetic theory, stellar formation theory, and the assorted hypotheses of abiogenesis are all distinctly separate theories. Well, except for abiogenesis, of course. And none of them are any part of evolution theory. This sort of religious distortion of scientific concepts is what physicist Wolfgang Pauli famously criticized in saying, "This isn't right, this isn't even wrong." Inmate 0645-2017 has just given us an example of fractal wrongness, where his perspective is so wrong that any arguments to support it are also wrong on every point and at every level. He's been corrected about this plenty of times before, including by me directly over and over again. But as I said, he does not concede any of his own mistakes because those are all he has, and he can't learn. So he just keeps repeating the same old lies, and I have to keep repeating the same corrections to them. For example, take a look at Berkeley University's introductory primer, Evolution 101, which I know he's already seen because he said so. Notice that it shows a basic division of prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but makes no mention at all about the origin of life, nor the origin of chemicals, planets, or the cosmos. That's because evolution is not about the origin of life, the universe, and everything. I think he's equivocating the modern definition of the theory of evolution, descent with inherent modification in reproductive populations of living organisms over many generations, and he's confusing that with the colloquial meaning of simply any change over time, which is what evolution meant back when Darwin initially chose that word and subsequently enhanced it. He says he got all this from his textbooks, but let's check mine. This one from Pearson says that evolution is descent with modification, the idea that living species are descendants of ancestral species that are different from the present day ones. And this one from McGraw-Hill says evolution is genetic change in population of organisms. And this one from Thompson says evolution is any cumulative genetic changes in a population from generation to generation, and that evolution leads to differences in populations and explains the origins of all the organisms that exist today or that have ever existed. Of course, the origin of organisms referred to what Darwin called the origin of species rather than the origin of life, because the origin of life obviously didn't begin with living ancestors, which is part of the definition of evolution. So abiogenesis is not part of evolution, and neither is planetary formation nor cosmogony, all of which were grossly misrepresented by this anti-scientist. This is the only textbook I have that was published within the last 10 years, but it's also the 11th edition. All my other textbooks are older than that. This one, on the evolutionary process, is from 1991, yet it doesn't include any mention of planet formation or cosmogony either. Instead, it adheres to the same definition as the other three books, which follow Darwin's original explanation, although enhanced and improved by 160 years of further research. I bought this textbook when I took a full semester course on evolution. That's 15 weeks wherein nobody brought up any of those unrelated theories in your list. We only talked about the last two on your list, which are both the same theory. Evolution is just a theory of biodiversity and nothing else. And this book, 1001 Things Everyone Should Know About Science, is not a textbook. It was published in 1992, and it says that evolution is both a fact of biology and a theory proposed by Charles Darwin, explaining how life developed through mechanisms like natural selection. There's a whole chapter dedicated to evolution, and it doesn't even mention the origin of the elements or the planets or the cosmos either. The same goes for Webster's 1913 dictionary, where evolution has a biological category, but there is not another one for the other categories that you're trying to erroneously associate. So your slippery misdefinition is a straw man. That was never correct. The real definition of evolution isn't slippery because it never changed, and it was never what you say it is. Since I have read all of Darwin's work and that of so many other professional scientists after him, I have to think that after taking multiple university science courses in evolution, as well as cladistics, historical geology, and paleontology, that I and the universities teaching those courses as science should know what evolution is better than some willfully ignorant P.T. Barnum grifter who bought his bogus doctorate from a religious degree mill through a mail order catalog.
The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is. God is claiming he did it, and he did it all in 6 days. That's what he's claiming. Now you guys don't like that, I know. Too bad, okay?
There is no way that I could believe the Bible short of suffering substantial brain damage, which listening to you can cause. But until then, I still have to point out that God didn't say anything there. Those were the words of superstitious primitives who wrote the Bible, making unsupported assertions about a magic imaginary being they made up in their ignorance. If God existed, he wouldn't have written the Bible, but if he had written the Bible, then it wouldn't be attributed to dozens of anonymous human authors, some of whom erroneously and some of whom never even existed. Nor would it waste so much time on irrelevant fables about things that never happened, while also promoting animal cruelty, incest, slavery, abuse of slaves, spousal abuse, child molestation, abortion, pillage, murder, cannibalism, genocide, and prejudice against race, nationality, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. If God had written the Bible, then he would have given us an accurate description of our origins and the nature of the earth in relation to the rest of the cosmos, rather than describing the earth as a flat disk under a giant crystal dome. And he would have included a primer, giving us a numeric system complete with a zero, as well as an explanation of the periodic table and a warning about infectious microbes. That's the least we could expect for any God worthy of worship, anyway. But the reason your God didn't say anything in the Bible is because he didn't write the Bible, because he never wrote or did anything, because he doesn't exist.
Can a universe create itself out of nothing? No, okay? Stephen Hawking says the universe is not created by God. Well, Stephen Hawking knows better now, doesn't he? He's already met him.
We won't see or know anything when we're dead. That's what being dead means.
Okay. You cannot know that any of this is true. You have to believe it's true. The Big Bang is part of evolution.
If Hovind wants to debate science, he's going to have to follow certain rules. One of them being that, of course, peer-reviewed articles reflect actual research experiments that really do qualify as evidence, regardless how much religious make-believers want to pretend otherwise. Another rule is that he doesn't get to redefine scientific terms in ways other than mainstream academic science uses those terms. And I have to stress that because creationists depend on equivocation along with a host of other fallacious arguments.
It's a religion that some people believe in, and they believe in it very strongly. I don't doubt, Mr. Nelson, you believe in it very strongly. I'm sure you do.
Not that I want to defend the Big Bang. I accept that it's the only theory of cosmic origin, and to challenge any theory, I would have to produce a better theory to use in its place. But I don't really like the Big Bang, probably because I don't understand it.
Doesn't make it true. The Muslims believe very strongly in their religion. So do the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and everybody. Doesn't make it true. Just because somebody strongly believes something, even if they get the majority to believe it, doesn't make it true.
Talk to a cosmologist about the Big Bang. Talk to a physicist about nucleosynthesis. I've already told you, I don't know either of those that well, but I can prove evolution even to your satisfaction, if you were honest enough to admit what it really is.
Even if they get the majority to believe it by force, like the Muslims do. You don't believe in Allah? Next. They're required to cut off their head or kill them if they don't believe like they believe. 109 times in the Quran. Get the books by Don Boyce on that. Anyway. So science is things that are observable and testable. Evolution, the Big Bang, is not observable or testable or demonstrable. You guys believe in it. It's your religion.
It isn't. The beauty of science is that it works because it's propelled by doubt rather than by belief. Science is a self-correcting process where religion starts out wrong and stays wrong, and in fact gets wronger over time.
Humanist Manifesto. Religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. What happened, Mr. Nelson? They used to admit it was religious back in 1933, and people pointed out, this is a state-sponsored religion. Oh, we better take out the word religious. The Big Bang Theory is purely religious. You believe in that.
And evolution is a theory of biodiversity which you have confused with philosophical naturalism, meaning that it has no belief in the supernatural, nor does it have anything to do with the origin of the universe. Even if cosmology were related to evolution, which it obviously isn't and can't be, that wouldn't matter, because cosmogonists now say that the universe is in some sense eternal and never had a beginning at all. I know you've been repeating this lie every day for years, but it's always been and always will be wrong. So when you repeat it tomorrow, we will all know, and your followers will know, that you're deliberately lying. We want to make sure that we don't adopt a belief at the onset.
because of course that would be dishonest. And it would be dishonest to throw out any evidence that flies against whatever belief you want to adopt at the onset. So we're better off both not having a belief to start with.
Science is a self-correcting process, like playing a game of 20 questions. With each new question, you have an increasingly accurate understanding, even if you're still considering some notions that haven't been corrected yet. That's why science used to believe some really dumb things, and religion still does. Because religion never corrects its errors. For example, when the Bible says in Genesis 30 that if cattle mate while looking at a striped stick, they'll produce striped calves, if somebody had proposed that as a hypothesis, we could test it and prove that it's wrong, even if we didn't yet know about genetics. But you can't correct any of the many errors in the Bible the way you can a failed hypothesis. Instead, you're commanded to believe the Bible anyway, even when you know it's wrong.
The current universe came into existence 14 billion years ago through an explosion, the Big Bang, from an infinitely dense point. I think the infinitely dense point is between the ears of those who believe this nonsense. That is infinitely dense to believe the whole universe could fit into a dot. Think about that for 5 minutes, or 5 seconds. It's dumb. Big Bang Theory is dumb. It's retarded. It's religious. You believe in it.
Except that it's not a religion by any definition. We've been all over this. Nor is it dumb, since it's well beyond your ability to understand it or even accept what it really is.
Big Bang, big claim. Why this bold idea is right. I downloaded today. Okay. What is the Big Bang Theory? It's the leading explanation. Oh, so it's something you believe in. Cosmologists believe the Big Bang. Oh, so it's something you believe in. It's a religion. Yes, it is. Most scientists think everything came from a Big Bang. It's a religion. Scientists don't believe in the Big Bang. They conclude it based upon the full suite of observations. This is ludicrous, okay? Tell all those folks at Forbes, whoever did this, I'll debate them all. Half my brain tied behind my back.
I think you put July 24th instead of June.
Oh, it is June. I keep putting the 7 on there, don't I? It's June. Change all those in your mind. Ready? 7. Okay. Big Bang. At first, this expansion was believed to be that matter was thrown out, blah, blah, blah. It's a belief. Big Bang is a religion, something that people believe in it very strongly.
He apparently thinks that every belief is a religious belief, and he's afraid to learn anything that challenges his belief, even if it's correct. Because we know that no matter how obviously wrong he is, he cannot, must not correct himself. He will not, because it doesn't matter what the truth is, because he just wants to believe, by his own admission. His type of religion depends on ignorance, such that the more you know, the less you believe. And he has to believe very strongly because he doesn't know anything.
The Big Bang is a scientific theory about how the universe began. It is widely believed the Big Bang Theory supports this is a belief. I believe. Does this mean I believe the Big Bang? Yes, you have to believe it. Most Americans don't believe the Big Bang. They don't believe it. They did a survey on this. When shown the phrase, the universe began 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang, only 21% said they believed it. I'll show you the chart in a minute. Most astronomers believe the universe began in a Big Bang. Mr. Nelson, this is a religious belief. It's not science. You can't observe it, test it, or demonstrate it, okay?
Your inability or refusal to understand this subject is not evidence against it. I note that that was the same defense that you attempted when you were convicted of tax fraud. You tried to argue your way out of that by saying you didn't understand what you were being charged with or why. That's called the argument from incredulity fallacy, and it will not help you here, just like it didn't work in court either.
Nothing really means nothing. Not only matter and energy would disappear, but also space and time. However, physicists theorize that from the state of nothingness the universe began in a gigantic explosion. It's in the textbook right over here on the shelf someplace.
The Big Bang wasn't nothing that exploded. And first of all, it wasn't an absolute philosophical nothing. Not even Lawrence Krauss believes in an absolute philosophical nothing. And cosmic inflation isn't really an explosion either.
This is a religious statement. This is not science. How big was the universe? 14 billion years ago, it was roughly a million billion times smaller than a single atom. That's pretty small.
Victor Stenger, Lawrence Krauss, and Sean Carroll have all redefined nothing such that it is not the absolute philosophical nothing that creationists believe in. that it is instead at least a vacuum state in a quantum field, which is actually something that could either be empty space, where at least space exists and energy can be stored according to laws of physics like general relativity, and the universe neither has nor necessarily needs a beginning, being infinite in both directions. Now, the concept of the singularity, as previously described, seems no longer in favor, I'm happy to say, though this is a recent change, and your references tend to be decades out of date. But if there was a cosmic inflation from a single event, where there was nothing, not even space-time, as had been previously opined, then, as I alluded before, that could well be a fourth spatial dimension inflating our three-dimensional space, or space-time, and that the source of all that material energy would be another source in the multiverse, so that even if we started with nothing, everything would still have come from somewhere else, being both something and eternal.
In my favorite cosmological model, which again is always subject to updating when new ideas or data come in, the universe doesn't have a beginning. It does not come into existence at a moment in time. It always existed. It looks different from moment to moment. And we are only observing a tiny part of it, so we don't even know what the whole thing looks like. But there's no need for an explanation to cause a beginning, something coming to existence out of nothing.
It's tempting to go one step further and speculate the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. You just don't get it, do you, Mr. Nelson? This is religious. So when I say the evolution theory is religion, I am correct. It is something you believe in. It is not something you can demonstrate scientifically. I am correct, okay?
Evolution is something that requires genes to have a change of genetic frequency of the alleles. Whether the initial sources, you can go back to where they came from the Earth, where they came from stellar nuclear synthesis, where they came from the Big Bang. You can always go back where the elements came from, but we're not asking where the elements came from.
Evolution does not depend on nor even relate to however the universe began. That doesn't matter, and I personally don't care how the universe came together, but I don't believe it came from nothing, regardless what your textbook said.
Big Bang Theory. I typed up the words here for this one. Big Bang Theory is an effort to explain what happened at the very beginning of our universe. Discoveries in astronomy and physics have shown beyond a reasonable doubt that our universe did, in fact, have a beginning. I would agree with that. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay? Prior to that moment, there was nothing. I would agree with that, too. During and after that moment, there was something, our universe. The Big Bang Theory is an effort to explain what happened during and after that moment. This is a religious belief. How did the Big Bang start? The first subatomic particles to be formed included protons, neutrons, and electrons, though simple atomic nuclei formed within the first 3 minutes after the Big Bang. This is, how could you possibly know such a thing? But thousands of years passed before the first electrically neutral atoms formed. They just make this stuff up, and people believe it. And it spun faster and faster. Yes, it was spinning around, and we cover all that on video number 1. History of the universe. You guys believe a dot of near nothing, or a dot of nothing in some cases, became everything today. Some people just don't get it. This is religious. See, you're doing it wrong. This is not how the umbrella works, okay? You're doing it wrong, all right? Science deals with things we can observe, test, and demonstrate. If you believe the Big Bang is part of science, you're doing science wrong. You don't get it. It's wrong. Secondly, there'd have to be chemical evolution. If the Big Bang Theory is true, it only would have produced hydrogen and maybe some helium or lithium or deuterium. Well, how do you get 92 elements? How do you get gold, silver, and platinum out of hydrogen gas? I would like to learn how to do that.
I have to wonder how it is that you've been such an active anti-scientist since at least the 1980s, yet you've somehow never heard the astronomer Fred Hoyle's explanation of nucleosynthesis? Especially since Hoyle was a creationist, albeit of a uniquely loopy sort. You've even used variants of his anti-evolution arguments. Your frog in a blender is an adaptation of Hoyle's original tornado in a junkyard. But however irrational Hoyle was, he was the first to say what physicists now think is correct, that in the superheated furnace of a typical star, protons can be agitated with such velocity as to form an atomic bond upon collision. Thus, 2 hydrogens collide to produce helium, and a third to get lithium, and a fourth to get beryllium, and so on, adding protons and usually electrons and occasional neutrons until you get all the way up to iron.
They'll say, well, fusion, you can fuse them in stars. You can't fuse past iron without enormous input of energy. And where's this energy coming from?
To make elements heavier than iron requires a higher energy level, meaning even hotter temperatures that usually only occur when a star goes nova. After which, of course, all those elements explode out into debris across the cosmos to later form planets in accretion. How do you not already know this? Isn't this just a high school primer to chemistry? Well, maybe not in your church.
Third theory of life's origin is known as chemical evolution. Chemical evolution, chemical evolution, chemical evolution. It is part of the theory, and it is a religious theory. You cannot know all the elements came from hydrogen gas. You don't know that. You can't even make it happen in the laboratory, let alone assume it happened in nature and prove it happened by itself. You believe it very strongly, but it's not part of observable, testable science. You just don't get it, do you? These elements, if the Big Bang produced hydrogen, how do you get these other elements, 92 naturally occurring plus the synthetic ones? It doesn't happen. Science is things we can observe. This big chemical evolution is not part of it.
Notice that none of this should be confused with evolution. Hoyle hated evolution and Big Bang theory. In fact, he was the one to popularize the name Big Bang in an attempt to ridicule the notion of cosmic inflation. He would be furious if he were alive today to see you lump all these different theories together. If he heard you say that his theory and the Big Bang theory were both part of the theory of evolution, he would lose his mind if he hadn't already.
Thirdly, stellar and planetary evolution. Nobody's ever seen a star or a planet form. Never.
You mean nobody's ever seen that before earlier this year? I mean, nobody's ever seen that before 2013? I mean, before 2010? Actually, they've been watching this one form since 1996. How many times does something have to happen before you admit that it happened?
Stellar evolution, the process by which a star changes over the course of time. Stellar evolution. Just Google stellar evolution. It's all over. All over the internet. The silent embarrassment of modern astrophysics, we do not know how a single one of these stars managed to form. Nobody has a clue how a star can form. The origin of stars represents one of the most fundamental unsolved problems of contemporary astrophysics. No one understands how star formation proceeds. It's really remarkable. You might believe in it, Mr. Nelson, and I'm sure you do. But that's why it's your religion. There's a lot of stars out there. Come watch them on our sand dune. There's a whole bunch. In there. It's unbelievable. We see them blow up once in a while. We never see one form.
Any argument with a creationist will involve a host of logical fallacies, and we've already seen several in this one. Projection, double standard, begging the question, argument from ignorance, false equivalence, and so on. But the worst fallacy in this particular debate is the definition fallacy, not to be confused with appeal to definition, which is different. Definition fallacy is when the problem with your argument is that the subject isn't what you think it is. Inmate 0645-2017 doesn't know what evolution is, and he thinks other things are evolution that aren't. But just to clarify, which I should have done earlier, the scientific explanation for the formation of the universe is Big Bang theory, proposed in 1927 by a Catholic priest named Georges Lemaitre, in an attempt to square the work of physicists like Einstein, Friedman, and de Sitter with Hubble's observations indicating an expanding universe. Lemaitre was a creationist who was happy with the idea of the universe having a beginning. The scientific explanation for the origin of chemical elements is the stellar nucleosynthetic theory proposed by another creationist, although an odd one, the astronomer Fred Hoyle in 1946. The scientific explanation for the formation of stars and planets is in two parts. The Nebular Theory, first proposed by a pair of philosophers, Emanuel Swedenborg in 1734 and Immanuel Kant in 1755, and then separately by mathematics engineer Pierre-Simon Laplace in 1796. Kant and Laplace also proposed the core accretion theory being a scientific explanation of planetary formation. Every one of these scientific theories has observable, documented, evidentiary support, and fulfilled predictions, and none of them are remotely like religious beliefs. The scientific explanation for the origin of life is not a theory. It was a hypothesis that was first proposed by another creationist named Rudolf Virchow in 1855. And since then, it has grown into more than a dozen interconnected hypotheses, each with evident experimental promise, and nearly all of them could be true at the same time. None of these hypotheses are remotely like religious beliefs either. The scientific explanation of biodiversity was proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859, and it is called the theory of evolution.
and it has more evidence backing it than all the others combined. And bear in mind that every one of these other theories were proposed by people who had either never heard of evolution or who rejected evolution, or both in the case of Rudy Virchow. So they cannot be classed as different levels under the umbrella term of evolution. They are not related and in no way connected. If you have to lump every scientific theory into what you imagine to be the religion of evolutionism, then your problem is not with the theory of evolution. Your problem is with scientific explanations. Your problem is with science.
How many stars are in the universe? Well, a bunch. 70 billion trillion stars is the current estimate. 70 billion trillion. That would be billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion, octillion, novillion, decillion. I can count a long ways. Okay. In a typical galaxy had 100 billion stars, there would be 2 times 10 to the 23rd stars in the observable universe, 3 times as much as earlier estimates. But even this is still probably an underestimate. Why don't they just give God the glory for the stars? You think all that was squished into a dot smaller than a period on a page? You just don't get it. You just don't get it.
Man, it has got to be hard finding people dumb enough to believe you. I have to wonder when the other folks in the room with you are going to notice that all these textbooks are teaching what evolution really is, and that your objection to that is that they're not teaching the fallacious strawman distortion of what you want to pretend that evolution is. It's time to give that up, because your lies are not in any of the textbooks. You have to address or accept what evolution really is.
So descent with inherent genetic modification, so they already have the ability to reproduce, they already are alive, they're already able to move, replicate, and ingest, digest food. You've already bypassed the major hurdles that are going to be a great obstacle to your religion.
I don't have a religion, and but
you certainly do.
We absolutely certainly do not. We're about to prove that. Kent,
Okay.
I want to hear your infantile definition of what a religion is, and let's see how you've explored that.
You can look it up in any dictionary. Look it up in Wikipedia.
Well, I have actually looked it up in a lot of different dictionaries. When I took a course on comparative or the history of comparative world religions, our professor there challenged us, saying that religion was something that he thought was impossible to define. I didn't think it was impossible to define because I do classification and I understand the rules for how to classify things. And as a matter of fact, I made this a little easier. I posted a collection of definitions that are relevant to this subject some years ago, back in 2012. I put something called Offerings to the Atheist Dictionary, because these are words that are comically is correct, that are comically misrepresented whenever you're arguing with creationists. The definition of religion that I came up with by examining all the different things that are universally accepted as religion by both their adherents and their critics are a doctrine of ritual traditions, ceremonies, mythology, and associated dogma of a faith-based belief system which posits a posthumous promise that some element of self, be it a soul or consciousness or memories, etc., may in some sense continue beyond the death of a physical being. Now, this applies to every religion that is universally accepted as a religion, and evolution, however, meets exactly none of these criteria.
My definition isn't false. It's the most accurate definition you are likely to find because it's corroborated by extensive research in comparative world religions in addition to other definitive sources. I'm right about this, and you're still wrong.
So I want to hear what you define as a religion and how we can distinguish things that are not religion from things that are.
Okay, I would like to ask Kyle or one of the moderators to kind of keep time here, because Aaron keeps over-talking me and monopolizing the conversation. This is supposed to be a discussion. I would like equal time.
Okay.
Fair
enough. He's asked you a question. We're going to give you ample time to respond to his question with a direct answer for a direct question.
I have up on screen the definition from Random House Webster's College Dictionary, year 2000, page 1116. Religion, a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. That is what fits your religion of evolutionism.
Except that it doesn't.
It does. That's exactly
it. It doesn't, because evolution has nothing to do with the cause of the universe, nor certainly not the purpose of it.
Does it have to do with the nature of the universe, how things work?
How things work, yes.
Okay, well then you have a
not
religion.
With the universe.
Okay.
Even the standard definition shows that evolution is not a religion, and Kent knows it's not. But he is not in the habit of correcting or even acknowledging his own mistakes, because that's all he has. If you can't dazzle him with brilliance, baffle him with bullshit. That's his game. He doesn't have any actual truth, and he doesn't even know what truth is, which is sad. Beware of false knowledge. It is much more dangerous than ignorance.
It's not a religion because it's not faith-based, and it's not a belief system. And it doesn't require belief. It doesn't teach belief. It discourages belief in favor of critical analysis and peer review.
Evolution isn't any kind of religion at all, not by any definition, not even by your own definition.
Okay, so just for the audience's sake, you are what I would say, skipping the first 5 definitions of what I call evolution, the cosmic.
What only you and people who do not know science call evolution.
Okay, I think every textbook from every public school teaches all these as part of the general overarching principle.
Except that none of them, no textbook anywhere ever described what you describe as evolution. Unless you want to get into A. Becker or some of the other Christian deliberate misrepresentations to try to deceive students. But if you're talking about actual scientific documents, nobody agrees with the way you misrepresent this. So we're going to keep evolution as descent with inherent genetic modification.
In a part of our debate that he doesn't ever want to get to, he would have to concede that evolution is not a religion because it doesn't meet any of the criteria of a religion, because it rejects faith and is not a belief system of any kind, but is an investigation and an objectively verifiable fact of population genetics and phylogeny that doesn't have anything to do with souls or any supposed afterlife, and is not a threat to the fate of any Christians or any other religious people who understand and accept the science as it really is and don't misinterpret or misrepresent it like creationists always do. The speciation is part of macroevolution, as it is and always was defined by the evolutionary biologists who invented that word, which is why all the educational sources still teach that it is. So he got that all wrong all along. That macroevolution and microevolution together are both part of the same scientific theory of biodiversity, meaning that evolution is science because what it really is really can be objectively verified even under direct observation and experimentation. That evolution is the only theory of biodiversity, and that it is only biodiversity, not a compilation of every other scientific theory relating to the origin of life, the universe, and everything else like he keeps pretending. That evolution does not teach that we came from nothing, because it is defined as descent with inherent genetic modification, which requires prior ancestors, just like the formation of life also requires a prior matrix. And for that reason, the evolutionary laws of biodiversity and monophyly do not allow for any change between kinds, or clades if you prefer, since there's no such thing as a kind anyway. And different species in the same genus may be able to hybridize sterile offspring, where different genera of the same family can no longer produce viable offspring without laboratory assistance. This shows how evolution increases biodiversity, but this could not be the case if there were created kinds bringing forth after their own kind, because they're obviously not bringing forth after their own kind anymore. So what even he admits that we actually do see in biodiversity supports evolution and disproves the concept of created kinds. That new genetic information is provided by mutations, according to textbooks in genetics, and backed by experimental studies to prove the point. And because we can use the theory to predict what sort of fossils we'll find before we find them, then fossils fulfilling those predictions actually do count as evidence supporting the theory. The different cladistic categories, or taxonomic classifications of life that prove that humans are apes and that birds are dinosaurs, are determined objectively according to a suite of morphological, embryological, and molecular data, without anyone having to draw any lines on any paper. That index fossils only provide relative dates, like this one is older or younger than that one, but that the ages of geologic strata as measured in a number of years really is absolutely dated radiometrically, that it is not the circular argument he wants to make it out to be. And although this one is his favorite lie, he's going to have to give it up and admit that evolution never taught that we came from rocks, since 1, no textbook or science lesson ever said that, and 2, solid crystalline minerals are not even a part of some organisms, including some of the earliest or most primitive ones. Anyone listening to that grifter from now on should know that the next time he tells any of these lies, and he will because he can't stop, know that he already knows that he's always been wrong about all these things, but he's dishonest and doesn't have the integrity to own up to that, because his whole cult, and compound depends on these lies, including his life's work of videos and seminars and everything that feeds his narcissistic need to feel important. All lies. Still, He has been proven wrong about all this clearly enough that it doesn't matter if he refuses to admit it. We already know why he can't even go there. Not to that part of my video.
Now, if we can get past that, which I know you're never going to concede this error, because when have you ever conceded any error, no matter how obvious?
So why don't you ever learn? Why can't you correct your mistakes?